So you have this great idea and maybe even this great prompt, and maybe you even tried building a first prototype using Figma Make or using tools like Lovable, but now you want to level up your game and move on to tools like Cursor. My name is Harry. I'm the head of design at one of Europe's biggest education companies with over 20 million users. And in my day-to-day job, I actually strive to help colleagues overcome their fear of code and help them make their first steps in prototyping and building out that app that they've been thinking about for super long but didn't know how to build. Because I think that's quite magical and it's not that difficult as many people seem to think initially. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take your first steps using Cursor and show you or try and convey why I think it's such a magical tool and try to get you to rethink how you could use tools like Cursor and Claude Code to rethink even other parts of your work and general life. So let's get into it. So we now have a very concrete idea of what we want to build and a good prompt to get started. We have done the first steps in Figma Make and in Lovable and seen what's possible using those tools. At least, what's possible in a couple of seconds and minutes. Now let's do the same in Cursor. So if you're new to Cursor, just have a look for the website. It's cursor.com, download it. It's super simple. Don't be intimidated by all of these scary looking pictures. It's not that complicated. Then you'll see a page that looks something like this. What Cursor is just a way to view folders and files inside of folders. What you have to do to get started is just to create a new folder or a new project. I'll create mine inside of my YouTube folder. I'll create a new folder and call it Pasta Timer. Create that, open it up, and then that's basically it. It is quite simple. Here, once you have folders, they'll appear here. And once you have files, they'll also be visible here. And this is basically the same thing that we had in Lovable, a text field where you can basically chat with an AI. And it's quite straightforward. So if we actually try this out, let's paste the prompt that we had and see what it gives us. I'll activate the planning mode just by pressing Shift and Tab, by the way, and it will do the same thing that Lovable did, for instance, and create here a plan. So in this case, a retro countdown website. It's a bit more technical, so it tells me what the file structure is going to be looking like. In this case, it's actually going with an HTML and CSS, so the simplest way of doing this. And it tells me a bit about the implementation details. This looks fine. The CSS styling is basically just applying all of the colors and the retro aesthetic that we wanted to. The JavaScript is used to basically do the underlying logic. So having the counter logic, it counting down from a certain amount of minutes, those kind of things. It has the features in here. What is nice here in comparison to Lovable, for instance, is that if you see something that you don't like, such as MMSS format, if you, for instance, wanted hours as well, you could just modify the file and save it. And once you're happy with the actual plan, you can just say, okay, Cursor, build this. In this case, the prompt was so clear that it didn't have any questions. But normally it would ask you, okay, so how exactly did you mean this? How did you mean that? Which I find personally helps me realize when I'm actually not clear myself as to what I want. And sometimes, by the way, I want to be broad on purpose because I want to give the AI the possibility to go off and do its own thing. Because I think it's quite magical. It's like telling your genius design intern, hey, build a timer app, and being super broad and seeing what, that intern, let's call him Lenny, comes up with, and then going to your other design intern, which is called Jessica, for instance, and giving her the same very broad prompt and seeing what she comes up with. And maybe you have two more and you see what they come back with. And actually that's something very, very cool to try out. Giving the same instruction, maybe even inside of Cursor, There's quite sophisticated ways of doing that using work trees and more, but that's a very cool way to see basically how would different individuals think about building a timer, and then looking at all of the outcomes, seeing what you like, what you dislike, taking the best parts of each, and then starting from scratch. That's actually a pretty cool way of thinking about it. It's a bit counterintuitive to build stuff only to then throw away most of it. But that's, to be honest, in my personal experience, oftentimes the experience of creative people anyway. So let's see what exactly happened. It said implementation complete. Cool. The timer logic is done. I could review the files if I wanted to, but to be honest, I don't. This is not an app that I want to be bug-free and be able to scale to millions of users at the same time. I'll use it a couple of times at best, so whatever. It'll know what it does, and it's not so complex that Cursor should get tripped up by this. So in this case, I'll just tell it, please open up this website in the Cursor browser. Since a few weeks ago, actually has a built-in web browser, which I think is quite cool to try things out. If I want to open it up in Cursor, I guess I'll have to ask it differently. I'll have to ask it, please give me the URL link that I can then use inside of the Cursor browser, because I want to show you what that looks like. If you press Shift, Command, and P, you'll be able to see some of these commands, and one of them is Open Browser. In this case, I'll be able to navigate to this page, and inside of Cursor itself, I'm now able to see the website. And what's also cool is that Cursor itself is able to see the website and make changes to that website. So it's no longer blind. It's not like agents of the past that would write code, but then not actually be able to see the outcome of what they were doing. Now you can actually enter loops, and if the model can see what it's done and if it's working or not, it can correct course on its own much better, which will lead to much better outcomes without you having to intervene so often, and thus reducing the amount of back and forth that you'll need to do. But that being said, I'll quickly show you what I can do here. I can open up some dev tools. You won't need those. That's if you really want to dive into it. I can also select different elements of the website and see basically how is this thing structured. In this case, for instance, all of this is part of a div. It has a header. H1 is the biggest header that there is. Below that, there is another div containing the timer. There's another div with all of the buttons in the horizontal layout. They all seem to be the same component. Even these two are also just button components. And if you wanted to, you could then reference this and tell it to, for instance, change the color. So let's say, please change the color of the reset button so it doesn't look identical to all of the pills above with the minute mark. And this is just a very precise way of doing things. What I used to do in the past, and what I sometimes still do with other tools, is that I take screenshots, and using a tool which I love, which is called CleanShot, I then circle it and paste the screenshot as context in whatever tool that I'm using. But this, being able to select it and have the context basically straight away with limited effort, is much nicer. It's a better user experience. And by the way, what I hadn't seen before, but what is quite nice, is that apparently now you can modify, a bit like in tools like Framer, you can modify the code straight away. So if you wanted to, for some reason, have all of the duration buttons in a column instead, you could in a single click. And if I'm not mistaken, okay, it actually doesn't change the code automatically. What it does is that it kind of acts like a website builder and allows you to edit things visually, but then actually it just turns that, I guess, into a prompt to then modify the code. I think this should give you a bit of a feel of what Cursor is like. I think it is not as intimidating as a lot of people think. And there's more and more visually pleasing, well-designed, less intimidating things that are going on and happening. And if you wanted to, you could also even not ever look at code. There is this new tab, if you click on Command E, which allows you to no longer see an editor, which is what developers used to code in back in the golden age, and still this day oftentimes do. But you actually have a UI that's optimized for prompting. So for interacting with AI agents, for them to write code and you just reviewing code, which is, I think, an interesting way of going about it. One of the downsides of Cursor, in my opinion, is that it's more difficult for you to publish a website or a prototype and share it with colleagues. It's not as intuitive as Figma Make or as Lovable, allowing you to publish it in one click. I'll show you maybe in a separate video how to create, a website domain and maybe like link it and host it on Vercel for free, by the way, in a couple of minutes, maybe like even 60 seconds. But that is one thing to keep in mind. It is simpler to publish things in Figma Make or in Lovable than it is at the moment in Cursor, unless you have a cool workaround that I might not know about. Let me know in the comments if you do, but that is something to keep in mind. This would be my intro to Cursor. Have a look and play around with it for yourself. I think it is a very, very nice way to not only build apps, but also like learn about coding. I might do another deep dive on how to use tools like Cursor to actually learn, for instance, HTML or like learn CSS. There's some cool ways of having it act like an actual tutor, a super patient, perfectly personalized tutor that doesn't give you random exercises, but helps you build what you want at the time that you want, in the fashion that you want, and learn along the way, which I think is amazing. But for the moment being, I'll leave you with this. In the next video, I'll actually show you the tool that I mostly use these days, which is Claude Code, and build the same website using Claude Code to try and demystify it a tiny bit before then going on to building not a website, but an actual mobile app with haptic feedback, with widgets, and more of those things, because all of those things are possible. That's quite magic. I'll see you then.